Welcome to the FinOps Show. I'm the host, Chris Love. On the show, we break down cost savings insights from world-class industry leaders. FinOps is an emerging practice that helps companies focus on computer infrastructure cost savings. For years, there's been a gap between earnings, profits, and computer engineering costs. Our guests provide information that will help you bridge that black hole. We bridge the hole through culture and process changes backed by data and financial management. Today, we're joined by Dieter Matzayan. He has been working in cloud FinOps since 2013 at companies like Google, Netflix, Intuit, and most recently Roku. He's a FinOps ambassador, a Riley Media author, and a YouTube creator.
Well, welcome to the show today, Dieter. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us.
Of course. Thanks for having me here.
Totally. So let's just jump right into it. Where's one of the areas that you see companies have the most waste that can be addressed by FinOps?
I think when it comes to waste, typically it is virtual machines, right? I personally see virtual machines as almost like a legacy thing. When you go, and it's fair to say that also 95% of all IT is still happening in the data centers and not in the cloud, right? So when you go from the data center into the cloud, you typically do a lift and shift. You use T-shirt sizes, small, medium, large, extra large, to determine what VMs you need in the cloud, right? And I think it is important to actually get into the cloud as quickly as possible because you have more flexibility there than you have in the data center, right? If you want to run an experiment that needs 100,000 cores for 4 hours, that will be rather difficult to do in the data center, right? But in the cloud, you can do this as long as you put the check up at the end of the month. That's totally in, right? So it is important to when you go into the cloud to do this quickly. But then you need to also refactor, right? There's multiple things that you can do: right sizing, cloud parking, if the workload doesn't have to be on 24/7. Using more cloud native services, those kind of things, right? So unfortunately, we don't have, none of the major cloud providers, AWS, GCP, and Azure, have the capability to have the VM automatically go in a hibernation mode like your laptop does when you close it, right?
That'd be nice, wouldn't it? maybe reinvents this next week. Maybe you should talk to AWS. Say, hey, you guys need a feature, a pause button that automatically happens for us.
I actually talked to the Oracle people about that. Yeah. There is some technologies that you can use. You can have a really lightweight container in front of the VM that takes any inbound network and wakes up the VM and then puts it through. Snowflake has that capability already, right? Snowflake, you can configure it to go into standby mode, right? So unfortunately, there is no standby mode for the most part for regular VMs, right? And so I think there's a lot of that waste that is happening. When it comes to cloud waste, there is also, when an engineer does an experiment, and the experiment is not successful, they immediately terminate everything and dismantle it, right? But if it is successful, they want to show it to their friends, right? They want to sort of get validation, right? And that process might be like 2, 3, 4 weeks, and this experiment is now, starting to affect the budget, right? So there's those kind of things as well, and then the usual things of like virtual disks that stay up after a VM has been shut down, right? And they have to be separately deleted or removed. There's lots of those types of things. We call them waste sensors. And the FinOps Foundation actually has on their GitHub a list of waste sensors. I don't know how many is, 40, 50, something like that.
Right. And you brought up bare metal. And to me, FinOps kind of starts with the cloud, but you can still put dollars and cents on bare metal, of course. The other thing that you brought up was refactoring and T-shirt sizing, moving to the cloud. When a company's T-shirt sizing going from data center to cloud native, is there anything that they should watch out for in terms of cost?
Yeah, I mean, the t-shirt sizing is a good first step, right? But it is very rough, right? And typically, in my experience, engineers over provision, right? The nobody is opening the wallet and has to put the dollars on the table themselves, right?
Right.
So there is, if the workload fails, then it's the engineer's fault. If the workload is over provisioned, then the FinOps team will eventually start harassing the engineers, but at least there is no direct impact, right?
Right.
So there is that, right? And then each of the cloud providers has a cost calculator, right? So you can get it for AWS, Azure, GCP, Oracle, and likely IBM has a cost calculator as well, right? However, when using the cost calculator, you need to be relatively accurate, right? You need to consider data transfer costs, right? And maybe in the data center you have not measured that because really frankly in the cloud how data transfer cost is metered or billed is ridiculous, right? Because this is not how networking works, right? You buy the network device and then you need to accrue the cost of the network device, right?
Right.
Think of your home Wi-Fi router, right? You buy this thing once and use it probably for like 7 years or something like that until something better comes out, right? Or that thing dies on you, right? But you don't pay by the gigabyte transfer, right? That's not a thing. But in the cloud, you get metered by the gigabyte. And so having the data transfer cost is typically a component that I see being forgotten.
Yeah, and it's especially in between availability zones. If you have, say, a cluster, Kubernetes or what have you, that spans AZs, you're gonna get a lot of costs that you're not expecting when you look at your bill at the end of the month.
Exactly right.
For folks that are starting or folks that are focusing more on FinOps, what's one of the easiest ways to reduce costs in the cloud, in your opinion?
One of the easiest ways, what I would do is look at if you have a dashboard that shows you waste, right? So on the AWS side, there is a QuickSight dashboard that you can set up, which is called the Kudos dashboard, or at least it used to be. And the Kudos dashboard also comes with a KPI tracker. And the KPI tracker, it's called KPI tracker, but it's really a waste dashboard, right? So you can install that thing and then give it some time and see what it shows as your waste opportunities. When I worked at Intuit, what we did is we built a waste dashboard where the highest dollar value was sorted to the top. And the waste was calculated of this is the current cost, this is how the optimized workload would cost, and we would display the difference between the current and the optimized cost, right? And that is the dollar number in waste. One of the first things that was requested is exceptions. The engineer said, I have a workload that is wasteful, but it's maybe running on Windows servers or something like that, right? We cannot change that. There is a plan to retire that in 2 years, right? But I don't want my item on that dashboard, right? So that was the first experience that we had is people wanted exceptions. And what we did is we made the exceptions to have a timeout, right? You tell me how long that is, 3 months, 12 months, whatever. And then the exception will go away so that those things are being surfaced again. It is also, when you do that with the exceptions, it is also important to have an ability to view those exceptions because there could be phases in your business life cycle, right, where you want to specifically look at optimizations. Now, we are potentially looking at the recession early 2023, right? And so a lot of businesses are now switching and looking for those opportunities, right? So to not have them visible is one thing, but to be able to surface that back into people's forefront of thinking is an important capability that you need.
Yeah, well, and that is a great transition to the next question I have. And what, with the economic times, we have some uncertainty. Whether or not, where we're heading is the uncertainty. What are some things that executives should focus on when looking at FinOps, when looking at their cloud bill?
Yeah, I mean, I think from an executive level, what I've seen is just really high-level generic goals, right? We need to reduce our cloud cost by X percentage, right?
Yeah.
Exactly, right? At my current employer, we are using AWS about 80%, and then maybe GCP another 18%, and then Azure is 2%, right? So the such a mandate would go across all cloud providers, right? Although in our case on AWS is the largest opportunity, and then each team can figure out how they can reduce the cloud bill. Now that said, at my current employer, when I started, the waste was less than 1%, which
really?
Yeah. When I started,
That's
I couldn't believe
unheard of.
Half of my job is gone. So believe me, how I
you worked yourself out of a job.
Yeah. Yes. So when I started at Intuit, we had 30% waste.
Yeah. That's about industry standard, right?
That's
20 to 30% waste, and waste. We're not talking about optimizing applications. We're not talking about doing any of those things. We're simply saying, turn off this application. We don't need it. That's
right. There was a database server that in the last 90 days had no inbound or outbound network traffic.
Yeah.
So what is it doing, right? So I think from the executives, we should expect more generic high-level goals, right? And then in combination with our waste is less than 1%, waste itself is not a solution for any substantial cost savings, right? If we were to go and wanted to, save 10, 15, 20%, we need to look at applications. What is it that they do inefficiently? One example that you brought up was that AWS encourages you to spread your application across 3 availability zones, right? That has underlying network traffic. So, one thing that you could do is just go with 2 availability zones, right?
Or one.
Yeah, exactly.
What's like if you just need 3 nines, that's a single availability zone. Why are we like? And most of the time you're like, okay, well, what's your SLO and SLA? And you're like, what? I'm like, well,
I don't know.
We need SLOs and SLAs so that we can figure out what availability you need. So,
yes. So many times I see that that can already result in a reduction, right? And then you need to go and look at you need a data management policy, right? You can't just like create data. It's like filling water into a balloon, right? It will just become bigger and bigger and bigger. And I'm not just talking about retiring data, right? Or moving it to colder storage options, or just simply deleting it, but also maybe compressing it and then storing it, right? And then if you need it, you uncompress it, and then you have access to your data. So you need sort of like a data management strategy as well.
Right. Yeah, totally. And just looping back to your point, executives need to set goals, realistic goals, and then from those goals, they need to provide, the time and resources so that teams can meet those goals.
Exactly.
What do you feel? We talked about data persistence. We've talked about network traffic. We've talked about dashboards. What do you feel are a few of the biggest hurdles that companies that are just starting off with FinOps are encountering today?
I think the biggest hurdle is to establish a FinOps practice, and that doesn't mean that you hire a person, right? The practice means that people are practicing FinOps, right? So you need engineering support, engineering engagement, right? And however, the engineer will not be able to do anything if their sprints, they already have their deliverables, right? They already have their roadmap, for the most part, 9, 12 months out. So they can't just squeeze something in there. There has to be management support, right? And for management to say, hey, you know what, we take a portion of a sprint and dedicate that to improvements, efficiency improvements, right? Usage optimization. for the manager to be able to say that, right, they need their manager to support it, right? So ultimately, I think it works better if it comes top down, right? When the executives are educated and know about FinOps, and they say, okay, we need to include FinOps in our daily routines.
Yeah, and we need the time. We need the time, resources to be able to save money. So, and this is again another good segue talking about you actually have to do the FinOps. It's not just, okay, let's make the pretty dashboards, let's get the people in place. It's actually the engineers that turn the knobs need the time to do it. And to me, that's a culture change. So with that in mind, what are some tips for companies to change their culture towards frugality, towards the goals that the executives have set? Because culture change is hard to me.
It is, but you can facilitate a culture change with training and education gradually, right? One thing that I've been doing, and I started doing that actually back at Netflix, and then I got sort of like a rhythm. I built a process because back in 2015, when I moved from Google to Netflix, there was no FinOps, cloud FinOps book, right? There was no guidance on how to do those things. So at Intuit, I actually went really into that system that I built, where I have monthly tech talks. I bring in the vendor, right? And the vendor talks about one topic, right? And the talk itself is always structured with like the first half is sort of like high-level overview, for the managers to be able to see roadmap, those kind of things, right? And then the second half of the tech talk, we do a hands-on, demos, deep dive into the technology, questions from the engineers that work with that technology, right? Those tech talks are recorded, and then the recording is being made available for when new engineers start working at the company, right? But in conjunction with having a Slack channel where the vendor is on that Slack channel, right? And engineers can ask questions, hey, or maybe escalate a support case, right? I just opened a support case. This is really important. I wanted to give you a heads up, those kind of things, right? Over time, there will always, in those tech talks, there will be a focus on cost as well, right? So we did one just this morning on DynamoDB and DAX, and the speaker did a fantastic job going into the cost implications of, how to tune your tables. And there was a lot of engineering questions as well. So, the combination of those things basically moves the usage optimizations to the forefront of the thinking of the engineers, right? It becomes a more natural thing. And ideally, what you want to accomplish is that cost is just another dimension that the engineers want to optimize.
Yeah, and gives them confidence too, right? You made the point that engineers are developing product, and their job is to keep the product on. And you also said something that's very true, they over-provision. Well, the reason they over-provision is so that they're not woken up at 2 a.m. and the product functions. And now you're asking them, hey, we need to optimize this. We need to reduce costs by 20%. So if you give them, like you said, key information on how to optimize Dynamo, rather than say, hey, go optimize Dynamo, they're not going to have the confidence in order to do it, that they're not going to be woken up at 2 a.m. So that's really, really great points. And I like the way you're doing brown bags or lunches. There we go.
Well, when we went to the office, right, we used to have like some food delivered, and stickers, engineers like stickers for the laptop.
Don't we all? Don't we all? So let's flip this around a bit. If your company's new into FinOps, you're hearing about it, but the bosses aren't doing it yet. And you mentioned change from top down is great, but often change comes from bottom up as well. What are some tips that you could give an engineer that's going to their boss or to the director on, hey, will you give us some time to save some money? What are some tricks to start that conversation?
I would build a business case, right? And that is something that engineers are not really familiar with, right? So a business case You have sort of like an example, right? So let's say you find a usage optimization, right? You quantify it, maybe it's $50,000 a month, right? And so that is your lead in, right? Is we found this thing, and then the business case is, here is what it would take to execute on this, right? To do the usage optimization. I actually, with my team, we sat together, we estimated that, right? We again sort of t-shirt sized it, right? And we was thinking, this might take like 20% of a sprint, right?
Right.
And that will give us $50,000. And to make this case, you just walk the person through that, right? And ask them if you can have time to work on this. Maybe you have multiple of those things, right? So give some options. If you only have one thing, the manager can only say yes or no, right? They don't have any options. But you can do a little bit of a vacuum salesman trick, right? Where you say like, oh, here's the expensive model for $1,000, right? Or you can buy this cheaper model for $200, right? So you use a similar negotiation tactic, right? Where you have maybe a couple of those, and they are all sized on how much effort they take. And then your engineering manager, instead of just having the ability to say yes or no, they actually feel like, hey, you know what, I can pick one or two of those, right? And you can influence that conversation this way.
Yeah, it's called the good, better, best close.
Exactly.
For the folks that do sales. And you brought up some really good points in terms of it's a negotiation. Get the data, maybe even get a no. No's are actually really important in terms of negotiations. Really good starting place. So wrap up with the last question I have today. If you had a billboard, say you've got the FinOps. We've got an event coming up in Amsterdam, and you're creating a billboard about FinOps for engineers. What would you say on it?
I would say FinOps is not about saving money. It is about getting the most out of every dollar that you spend in the cloud.
Optimizing. Yeah. Can you speak a bit more about what you mean about that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people think about it's about saving, right? About cost reductions or turning stuff off and those kind of things, right? Think of it more of from an efficiency principle, right? Engineers want to be efficient. It is not really just about we saved X amount of dollars. It is that you're doing the same thing more efficiently now, and I think that aligns more with engineering culture.
Yeah, it's the Webb Brown was on last episode, and he talked about that optimization is a really interesting engineering problem.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, make that
optimize.
Yeah, make that the problem that you're solving, not that we have to meet the budget.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much. Is there anything you wanted to wrap up on? Any nuggets of wisdom?
I just want to give a shout out to the FinOps Foundation. Anyone can join. I believe membership is free at the moment for the time being. You just need to apply as a practitioner, right? Not as a company. Companies need to pay for membership, right? But practitioners, as far as I know, are free. And if you just getting started with FinOps, maybe read the Cloud FinOps book from J.R. Storment and Mike Fuller. That's a good starting point. And if you feel confident, you can actually get a FinOps practitioner certification.
Very cool. Very cool. And why don't you give out the URL for the FinOps Foundation as well?
It's just FinOps.org.
You kind of broke up on that. You want to repeat that?
It's FinOps.org.
Perfect. Again, thank you for your time and appreciate your insights and joining us today.
Yeah, very happy. Thanks for having me here.